Innocent bride forced to marry a ruthless billionaire. After his first night with her, he won't stop. I don't want your body, Lila. I want your surrender. His voice cut through the darkness of the bedroom, cold and unyielding as steel. When I look at you, I see something I've never encountered before. Someone who refuses to be bought, despite signing herself away. Sebastian's fingers traced the curve of her jaw, his touch feather-light yet inescapable. You think this is about the contract? About your family's debts? A humorless laugh escaped him. No, Lila, this is about possession. From the moment I saw you, I knew I wouldn't stop until you were mine. Not just your name on paper. Not just your body in my bed. Everything. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs as she met his gaze, refusing to look away despite the terror coursing through her veins. You can't possess a soul, Sebastian, no matter how many billions you have. His eyes darkened, something dangerous flickering in their depths. Watch me. Have you ever wondered what happens when a woman with unbreakable spirit is forced to marry a man who collects companies and people with the same cold efficiency? What price would you pay to save your family? And what happens when the line between captivity and desire begins to blur? I'm Mr. Harrison, and today I'm sharing the story of a contract marriage that became an obsession, and the unexpected journey of two people who discovered that true possession isn't about control, but surrender. If you've ever felt trapped by circumstances beyond your control, or wondered about the fine line between sacrifice and self-destruction, this story will resonate deep in your soul. Give this video a like if you believe some cages are more dangerous for their beauty than their bars. The rain lashed against the windows of Lila Andrews' tiny apartment, each drop a ticking clock counting down the hours of freedom she had left. 27 years of fighting for independence, of working 3 jobs while pursuing her degree, of never accepting handouts. All of it reduced to a signature on a contract that sat before her on the scratched kitchen table. Her father's voice still echoed in her ears, broken and hollow with shame. He bought all the debts, Lila. Every last one. The medical bills, the business loans, everything. He says he'll forgive it all if I marry him, she had finished, watching her father's face crumple. Sebastian Blackwell. The name alone was enough to make business titans tremble. At 35, he had built Blackwell Industries into a global empire through brilliant strategy and ruthless execution. He acquired failing companies like others collected art, seeing value where others saw only ruin, stripping them down and rebuilding them in his image. And now he wanted to acquire her. Lila's fingers traced the final page of the contract, where 2 signature lines awaited completion. The terms were explicit. A marriage of convenience, lasting a minimum of 2 years. She would live in his home, attend functions as his wife, and fulfill all marital obligations as required. In return, her family's debts would be erased, her father's small business saved, and her younger brother's medical treatments fully funded. You have until tomorrow, her father had said, unable to meet her eyes. He wants an answer by noon. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The car will collect you at 10 a.m. Pack only what matters. Everything else will be provided. No signature needed. Only one man would send such a command disguised as courtesy. Lila closed her eyes, remembering the single time she had encountered Sebastian Blackwell in person. It had been at a charity gala where she'd been working as a server, one of her 3 jobs that barely kept her afloat. He had entered the room and the atmosphere had physically changed. Conversations hushed, postures straightened, attention diverted. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Tall, with shoulders that filled out his custom suit to perfection, he moved with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. His face was all sharp angles and cold beauty, with eyes that assessed everything as either an asset or an obstacle. Those eyes had found her across the crowded room, lingering for a moment too long. She had felt stripped bare, catalogued, and dismissed in the space of a heartbeat. Now those eyes would be watching her every day. Those hands would claim her body. That mind would expect her submission. With trembling fingers, Lila signed the contract. The ink seemed to bleed into the paper, sealing her fate with each stroke of the pen. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you love, hit that like button. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is sacrifice our freedom for those who gave us life. The Blackwell estate loomed against the twilight sky like a fortress of glass and stone, its modern architecture a testament to its owner's preference for clean lines and controlled environments. As the car pulled through the gates, Lila felt her chest tighten with each inch of freedom left behind. Ms. Andrews, a woman in her 50s, greeted her at the entrance, her posture impeccable, her expression professionally neutral. I'm Mrs. Winters, the household manager. Mr. Blackwell has asked me to show you to your rooms and explain the household routines. My rooms? Lila questioned, clutching her small suitcase like a shield. Yes, you have a private suite connected to the master bedroom. Mr. Blackwell thought you might appreciate your own space. Initially. The implication hung in the air between them. Initially. As if her privacy was a temporary concession that would eventually be revoked. Mrs. Winters led her through the mansion's sprawling interior, a maze of minimalist luxury that felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was pristine, untouched, as if waiting for life to begin. Mr. Blackwell will return at 7 for dinner, Mrs. Winters informed her as they reached a set of double doors. He expects you to join him. Appropriate attire has been provided. With that, she opened the doors to reveal a suite that was larger than Lila's entire apartment. Soft cream walls complemented the plush carpeting, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of manicured gardens that stretched to a distant tree-line. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, draped in linens that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The bathroom is through there, Mrs. Winters continued, gesturing to another door. Your closet has been stocked according to Mr. Blackwell's specifications. If anything doesn't fit, please let me know immediately. According to his specifications? Lila repeated, a chill running down her spine. Mrs. Winters' expression softened slightly, the first crack in her professional veneer. Mr. Blackwell is particular about appearances, especially when it comes to things he considers his. Things, not people. Things. The ceremony will be tomorrow afternoon. Small, private, but legally binding. The marriage license requires your signature before the officiant arrives. Mrs. Winters placed a folder on the bedside table. Mr. Blackwell has already signed his portion. Of course he had. Sebastian Blackwell would never leave anything to chance, especially not the acquisition of his newest possession. I'll leave you to settle in, Mrs. Winters said, moving toward the door. She paused, her hand on the handle. Ms. Andrews, Mr. Blackwell is not an easy man, but he is fair in his way. Remember that. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Lila alone in her gilded cage. She moved to the windows, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Freedom lay beyond, tantalizingly close yet impossibly distant. For a moment, she considered running, grabbing what little she had brought and disappearing into the night. But where would she go? How far could she get before Sebastian Blackwell's considerable resources tracked her down? And what would happen to her family when she broke the contract that promised their salvation? No, running wasn't an option. She had made her choice the moment she signed those papers. With resigned determination, Lila opened the closet doors to find rows of clothing in her size. Dresses, suits, casual wear, all in muted, elegant tones that spoke of wealth without ostentation. At the center hung a single garment bag, larger than the others. Her wedding dress. She unzipped it slowly, revealing a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that would have been her dream gown under different circumstances. Now it represented the chains that would bind her to Sebastian Blackwell. A small card was pinned to the hanger, bearing a single line in bold, masculine handwriting. Wear this tomorrow. Wear nothing tonight. Lila's breath caught in her throat, the card trembling between her fingers. The message was clear in its brutal simplicity. Tomorrow she would be his wife in name. Tonight, she would become his in every other way. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the card still clutched in her hand, as the reality of her situation crashed over her. This wasn't just about saving her family anymore. This was about surviving a man who saw her as something to be claimed, possessed, consumed. The distant sound of a car engine cut through her thoughts. Through the windows, she watched a sleek black Bentley curve up the driveway, its headlights cutting through the gathering darkness like predatory eyes. Sebastian Blackwell had arrived home. To his house. To his domain. To her. Lila stood, squaring her shoulders as she faced the door that connected her suite to the master bedroom. She had signed the contract knowing what it meant. She had agreed to the terms with open eyes. Now she would face the consequences of her choice with whatever dignity she could muster. The connecting door remained closed, but she could feel his presence on the other side. Waiting, calculating, anticipating. Time stretched between them like a thread pulled taut, ready to snap at the slightest touch. When the knock finally came, it was almost a relief. "Come in," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened, and Sebastian Blackwell filled the frame, his imposing height and broad shoulders making the spacious room suddenly feel confining. He had loosened his tie but was otherwise still dressed in the bespoke suit he'd worn all day, every inch the powerful CO. His eyes, a cold gray that reminded her of winter storms, took in every detail of her appearance before meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Lila Andrews," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like he was tasting it. At last, she lifted her chin, refusing to show the fear coursing through her veins. "Mr. Blackwell." "Sebastian," he corrected, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "If we're to be married tomorrow, you should use my given name." "Is that an order?" The words escaped before she could stop them, a small act of defiance she couldn't suppress. His lips curved into something too predatory to be called a smile. "Consider it the first of many requests." He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a man completely at ease with his power, stopping close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "Did you read the contract thoroughly, Lila?" he asked, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. His touch was light, almost gentle, but she felt branded by it nonetheless. "Every word," she answered, fighting the urge to step back. "Then you understand what I expect." It wasn't a question. "You expect obedience," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "You expect me to play the role of devoted wife in public and willing body in private. You expect ownership." Something flashed in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or surprise at her bluntness. "Smart girl," he murmured. "But you've missed something important." "What's that?" His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her lower lip in a gesture that was both possessive and oddly intimate. "I expect everything, Lila. Not just your obedience or your body. Everything you are. Everything you might become." The raw hunger in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. Not entirely from fear, which frightened her more than his words. "Why me?" she whispered, the question that had haunted her since receiving the contract. "You could have anyone. Why choose me?" Sebastian's eyes darkened, his expression shifting to something she couldn't read. "Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were mine. You just didn't know it yet." His hand slid to the nape of her neck, drawing her closer until his breath mingled with hers. "But you will, Lila Andrews. Starting tonight, you will learn exactly what it means to belong to me." As his lips claimed hers in a kiss that was both a promise and a threat, Lila realized the truth that would define her new life. Sebastian Blackwell wouldn't just possess her body, he intended to consume her soul. And the most terrifying part was the small voice inside her wondering if surrender might be her salvation after all. If you're feeling that chill down your spine, hit the like button. There's something both terrifying and fascinating about a man who sees what he wants and takes it without hesitation. But remember, true connection can never be forced. It must be earned. The wedding was a cold, efficient affair. No friends, no family. Just Lila in the ivory silk dress, Sebastian in a perfectly tailored black suit, and a stone-faced officiant who recited the vows as if reading a business contract. Mrs. Winters and the estate's security chief served as witnesses, their expressions carefully neutral as Lila promised herself to a man who had purchased her future like a commodity on the open market. "With this ring, I thee wed," Sebastian said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of possession as he slid a platinum band onto her finger. The diamond was flawless and ostentatious, catching the light with every movement of her hand. A beautiful shackle. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian's kiss was brief but claiming, his hand at the small of her back preventing any retreat. His eyes never left hers, searching for something Lila was determined not to give him: surrender. The wedding dinner was served in the formal dining room, a cavernous space with soaring ceilings and a table that could seat 20, but was set for just the two of them, positioned at opposite ends like adversaries across a battlefield. "You've barely touched your food," Sebastian observed, his voice breaking the tense silence that had stretched between them. "Are you not hungry, wife?" The word hung in the air between them, a reminder of what she had become. "I find my appetite diminished by circumstance," Lila replied, meeting his gaze across the expanse of polished mahogany. Sebastian's lips curved slightly. "Honesty. Good. I despise pretense." He took a sip of wine, studying her over the rim of his glass. "You may speak freely with me, Lila. In fact, I insist upon it. I didn't marry you for mindless agreement." "Then why did you marry me?" she challenged, setting down her fork. "You still haven't given me a real answer." "Haven't I?" He leaned back in his chair, regarding her with those penetrating gray eyes. "I told you last night. I saw you and I knew." "Knew what, exactly?" "That you were different." Sebastian's voice dropped, becoming almost intimate despite the distance between them. "Do you know how many people in my world are genuine, Lila? None. They're all performing, calculating what I want to hear, what will benefit them most. But you." He leaned forward slightly. "That night at the charity gala, when you thought no one was watching, I saw you slip your dinner roll to a homeless man outside the service entrance. You gave away food you probably needed yourself." Lila stared at him, stunned that he had noticed such a small moment. "You have integrity," he continued. "It's a rare commodity, and like all rare things, immensely valuable." "So I'm just another acquisition?" she asked, her voice tight. "Another rare commodity for your collection?" Sebastian's expression hardened. "You're my wife, and you would do well to remember that I protect what's mine." After dinner, he led her to his study, a masculine space of dark woods and leather, walls lined with books that, unlike many wealthy men's libraries, showed signs of actually being read. He poured himself a scotch, not offering her one, and gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Your brother's first treatment is scheduled for next week," he said without preamble, sliding a folder across the desk toward her. "I've arranged for him to see the top specialist in the country. Your father's debts have been cleared, and I've restructured his business with an infusion of capital that should make it profitable within 6 months." Lila opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the documents that confirmed everything he said. Her brother would get the treatment he desperately needed. Her father would keep his business, his dignity. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words inadequate but necessary. "I'm a man of my word, Lila." Sebastian moved around the desk, perching on its edge directly in front of her, close enough that his knee nearly touched hers. "I fulfill my obligations. I expect the same from you." The implication was clear. She had signed the contract. She had made her vows. Now it was time to honor them. "I understand," she said, meeting his gaze steadily despite the fear fluttering in her chest. "Do you?" He reached out, tilting her chin up with one finger. "Because I meant what I said last night. I don't just want your body, Lila. I want all of you. Your thoughts, your desires, your surrender. You can't force someone to give you their soul," she whispered. "No," he agreed, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "But I can make you want to give it to me." That night, when he came to her room, Lila expected coldness, dominance, perhaps even cruelty. What she didn't expect was patience. Sebastian undressed her slowly, his touch reverent yet possessive. His eyes never leaving hers as if he could see through to her very core. "You're trembling," he observed, his fingers tracing the curve of her shoulder. "I'm afraid," she admitted, refusing to lie even now. "Of me." His voice was soft, almost gentle. "Of losing myself." Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "I don't want to erase you, Lila. I want to possess you. There's a difference." His kiss was not gentle this time, but demanding, consuming, as if he could indeed devour her soul through the press of his lips against hers. And despite everything, the contract, the coercion, the cold calculation that had brought her to his bed, Lila found herself responding, her body betraying her mind as it arched toward his touch. When he finally claimed her, it was with a possessiveness that marked her as thoroughly as any brand. "Mine," he whispered against her skin, the word a prayer and a declaration as his body moved with hers. "Say it, Lila. Say you're mine." She bit her lip, refusing to give him that final surrender even as pleasure threatened to overwhelm her resistance. Sebastian's eyes darkened, his movements becoming more intense, more demanding. "Say it," he commanded, his voice rough with need. "No," she gasped, clinging to this last shred of defiance even as her body betrayed her. Instead of anger, a smile curved his lips, predatory, triumphant. "You will," he promised. "Not tonight, but you will." Afterward, as she lay beside him, Lila stared at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the woman she had always been with the woman who had responded so eagerly to the touch of a man who had essentially purchased her. She had expected to feel violated, used. Instead, she felt seen in a way she never had before, as if Sebastian had looked past her circumstances to something essential within her. It terrified her more than any cruelty could have. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice cutting through the darkness. "That I don't understand you," she answered honestly. "You will." His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining with a possessiveness that was becoming familiar. "We have time." But time, Lila discovered over the following weeks, was both her ally and her enemy. Each day in Sebastian's world pulled her further from the independent woman she had been, reshaping her into the perfect corporate wife. Her days were filled with charity committee meetings, luncheons with the wives of Sebastian's business associates, and endless fittings for a wardrobe befitting Mrs. Blackwell. Yet each night, when Sebastian came to her, she found herself surrendering a little more to the physical connection between them, even as she fought to maintain the barriers around her heart and mind. "You're still fighting me," he observed one evening as they lay tangled in the sheets, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Why?" "Because you don't want a wife," Lila said, meeting his gaze in the dim light. "You want a possession, and I won't be that." Sebastian's expression darkened, his hand stilling on her skin. "You think I don't know the difference between a person and a possession? I think you've spent so long acquiring things that you've forgotten how to connect with people," she replied, her voice soft but unflinching. "Everything in your life is a transaction, Sebastian, even me." He sat up abruptly, the sheets pooling around his waist, his face cast in shadow. "Is that what you think this is? A transaction? Isn't it? You bought my father's debts. You bought my brother's medical care. You bought me." "I secured you," he corrected, his voice tight with controlled anger. "There's a difference. Not to the one being secured." Lila pulled the sheet around herself, suddenly feeling vulnerable in her nakedness. "You can own my time, Sebastian. You can own my body, but you can't own my heart or my mind. Those have to be earned." For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Then, without another word, he rose from the bed, gathered his clothes and left her room. It was the first night since their wedding that he had not slept beside her. If you've ever stood your ground against someone who thought they could control you, hit that like button. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting back, but in refusing to surrender what makes you who you are. The following days brought a subtle shift in their dynamic. Sebastian was still commanding, still possessive, but something had changed. He began asking questions about her life before him, her studies, her dreams, the 3 jobs she had worked to support herself through college. He listened with an intensity that suggested he was cataloging every detail, building a complete picture of the woman he had married. "You never finished your degree," he observed one evening as they sat in his study, Lila reading while he worked through a stack of contracts. "In environmental engineering. You were only 2 semesters away." She looked up, surprised that he knew this detail. "There wasn't time. Or money. My brother got sick, and my father's business started failing. My family needed me. And now what? Would you finish it if you could?" His eyes were intent on her face, searching for something. Lila hesitated, uncertain of his motives. "Why do you ask?" "Because I want to know." His voice held an edge of frustration. "Is that so difficult to believe?" "Yes," she admitted honestly. "Everything with you has a purpose, Sebastian. A strategy." He set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "Then let me be clear. I want to know because it matters to you, and therefore it should matter to me. Would you finish your degree if you could?" The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "Yes," she said finally. "I would. I was working on designs for sustainable water filtration systems for developing countries. I hoped I could make a difference." Something shifted in Sebastian's expression, approval, perhaps, or respect. Admirable. And entirely possible. The next morning, an envelope was waiting beside her breakfast plate. Inside, Lila found enrollment papers for the university's online program, along with a letter confirming that her previous credits had been accepted and she was cleared to complete her final 2 semesters. "What is this?" she asked when Sebastian entered the dining room, his expression carefully neutral as he watched her reaction. "An opportunity," he replied, pouring himself coffee. "Nothing more, nothing less. What you do with it is your choice." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Sebastian met her gaze directly. "Because you're right. Some things can't be bought or taken. They must be earned." He set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Consider it a first step." That evening, for the first time since their marriage, Sebastian didn't come to her room. Instead, a note was delivered by Mrs. Winters. "The choice is yours tonight. My door is open if you want me. If not, I understand." Lila stared at the note for a long time, tracing his bold handwriting with her fingertip. This was different. Not a command or an expectation, but a choice. A small acknowledgement of her autonomy in a relationship built on its absence. After an hour of internal debate, she found herself standing outside his bedroom door, her hand raised to knock, uncertain what had brought her there. Desire, curiosity, or something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door opened. Sebastian stood there, his expression guarded yet vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I wasn't sure you would come," he said quietly. "Neither was I," she admitted. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter but not touching her, maintaining a distance that felt significant after weeks of possessive contact. His bedroom was surprisingly austere for a man of his wealth. Minimalist furnishings in dark woods and grays, the only personal touch a single photograph on the nightstand that Lila couldn't quite make out. "Why did you really marry me, Sebastian?" she asked, turning to face him. The truth this time. He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Because you were the first person in 15 years who looked at me and saw a man, not a bank account or a stepping stone." His voice was low, almost reluctant. "That night at the gala when our eyes met, you didn't see Sebastian Blackwell, CEO. You saw me, and then you looked away, completely unimpressed." A small, surprised laugh escaped her. "That's why? Because I wasn't impressed." "Because you were real," he corrected. "In a world of carefully constructed facades, you were genuinely yourself. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? Lila? How valuable. So you decided to buy me?" The words held less bite than before, softened by the vulnerability in his expression. I decided I had to have you, he corrected. The only way I knew how. Through control. Yes. He didn't try to deny it. Control is necessary for me. It's how I've survived. Something in his tone caught her attention. A hint of old pain carefully concealed. Survived what? Sebastian turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the darkened gardens. For a moment, Lila thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if coming from somewhere deep in his past. My father was a violent man, he said simply. My mother was his favorite target, until she died when I was 8. Then I became his focus. The only time I was safe was when I could predict and control his moods, his actions. I became very good at it. At control. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Lila moved to stand beside him at the window, close but not touching, offering presence without pressure. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't be. It made me who I am. And who is that, Sebastian? The man who needs to control everything and everyone around him? The man who buys people because he doesn't know how to connect with them? He turned to her then, his expression stripped of its usual mask. Yes, that's exactly who I am. The question is, can you accept that? I don't know, she answered honestly. But I'm starting to understand it. Understanding, Lila discovered over the following weeks, was a dangerous thing. It created bridges where walls had stood, opened doors to rooms she had been determined to keep locked. As Sebastian gradually revealed more of himself, his past, his thoughts, his rare but genuine moments of vulnerability, she found her resistance weakening. He was still controlling, still possessive, but now she saw the wounded boy beneath the powerful man, the child who had learned that control meant survival. It didn't excuse his methods, but it explained them in ways that made her heart ache despite her determination to remain detached. For his part, Sebastian seemed to be making his own discoveries. He began including her in discussions about his business, valuing her perspective on environmental initiatives Blackwell Industries was considering. He arranged for her to have a home office where she could work on her studies without interruption. Small concessions to her independence that felt significant in their acknowledgement of her as a person, not a possession. Yet the fundamental imbalance remained. She was still, in essence, a woman who had been purchased, living in a gilded cage, no matter how comfortable that cage had become. The breaking point came 3 months into their marriage, during a charity gala hosted at the Blackwell estate. Lila had been playing her role perfectly, the elegant, supportive wife, charming Sebastian's business associates and their spouses with practiced ease. She had become adept at this performance, at being Mrs. Blackwell in public while trying to remain Lila Andrews in private. She was engaged in conversation with the wife of Sebastian's chief financial officer when she overheard a nearby conversation that made her blood run cold. Blackwell's latest acquisition is quite the trophy, a man's voice said, just loud enough to reach her ears. Pretty little thing from nowhere. Heard he bought her father's company when it was failing and made the marriage part of the deal. Classic Sebastian, another voice replied with a chuckle. Always gets what he wants. Remember that resort in Bali? The owner wouldn't sell, so he bought the bank that held the mortgage and foreclosed. Wonder how long this one will last before he trades up. The first Mrs. Blackwell barely made it a year. The first Mrs. Blackwell. The words echoed in Lila's mind, a revelation that sent the room spinning around her. Sebastian had been married before, a fact he had never mentioned, a significant detail omitted from the carefully constructed narrative of his life he had shared with her. Excusing herself from her conversation, Lila made her way through the crowd, smiling mechanically at guests while her mind raced. She found Sebastian in the center of a group of investors, commanding attention as always. When he saw her approaching, something in her expression must have alerted him, because he immediately excused himself and moved to meet her. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly, his hand finding the small of her back in that possessive gesture she had come to know so well. "We need to talk," she said, keeping her voice low. "Now." Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded, guiding her smoothly through a side door and into his private study, away from the curious eyes of their guests. The moment the door closed behind them, Lila pulled away from his touch, creating distance between them. "You were married before," she said, the words falling between them like stones. "Were you planning to tell me? Or was that information not included in our transaction?" His expression hardened, the mask of the ruthless businessman sliding back into place. "It was a brief marriage that ended years ago. It wasn't relevant." "Wasn't relevant?" Lila's laugh held no humor. "You know everything about me, Sebastian. Every detail of my life, my family, my past. You've researched me, studied me like one of your business acquisitions. But you didn't think your previous marriage was something I deserved to know." "It was a mistake," he said, his voice clipped. "A youthful error in judgment that I corrected quickly." "Corrected?" The word sent a chill through her. "What does that mean exactly? Did you discard her when she no longer suited your purposes? Is that what awaits me when you tire of your latest acquisition?" Something dangerous flashed in Sebastian's eyes. "You are not an acquisition, Lila." "Then what am I?" she challenged, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm a woman who was purchased to fulfill a role, a contract with a pulse, a living, breathing business deal. You're my wife," he growled, closing the distance between them with 2 swift strides. "And you're nothing like her." "How would I know that? I know nothing about her, just like I'm realizing I know nothing about you." "Not really." Lila held her ground despite his looming presence. "All these weeks, I've been trying to understand you, to see past the control and the possessiveness to the man beneath. I thought we were building something real, something beyond the contract. But it was all just another transaction, wasn't it?" Sebastian's hands came up to frame her face, his touch firm but not cruel. "Listen to me very carefully, Lila. My first marriage was a mistake because it was exactly what you describe. A business arrangement, a merger of assets with a woman who wanted my money and the status of my name. It lasted 8 months before I discovered she was sleeping with my chief competitor while selling him company secrets." The raw pain in his voice caught Lila off guard. This wasn't the calculated response of a businessman. This was the wounded reaction of a man who had been betrayed. "She never saw me," Sebastian continued, his eyes locked on hers. "Not once. All she saw was what I could give her, what she could take from me, just like everyone else in my life." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones in a gesture that was almost tender. "Until you." "Me?" Lila whispered, confusion replacing some of her anger. "You, who looked at me without a shred of impression that first night. You who challenges me at every turn. You who sees the broken parts I've spent a lifetime concealing." His voice dropped, becoming almost vulnerable. "You, who makes me want to be worthy of more than fear and obedience." The raw honesty in his words struck Lila speechless. This wasn't the controlled, calculating Sebastian she had come to know. This was something else entirely. A man laying himself bare, revealing wounds he had kept hidden beneath layers of power and control. "I didn't tell you about my first marriage because I wanted to forget it ever happened," he admitted. "Because it represents everything I despise. Falsehood, manipulation, betrayal. Everything that you are not." "But you manipulated me," Lila said softly, not pulling away from his touch but not yielding to it either. "You bought my father's debts to force me into marriage. How is that different?" Sebastian's hands fell away from her face, his expression shuddering. "You're right." The admission seemed to cost him something vital. "I did what I've always done. I saw something I wanted, and I used my power to acquire it. To acquire you." He stepped back, creating space between them. "I told myself it was different because my intentions were different. But the method was the same." The acknowledgement hung in the air between them, more significant than any gift or concession he had offered in their months together. For the first time, Sebastian Blackwell was admitting that his control was not just protection, it was a flaw. "I don't know how to be different," he said finally, his voice low. "Control is how I've survived. It's how I've built everything I have." "And is it enough?" Lila asked, the question gentle despite the weight it carried. "All this control, all this power, Does it make you happy, Sebastian? He looked at her then, really looked at her, with an expression so raw it made her heart ache. It did. Until you showed me what I was missing. If you've ever realized that the walls you built to protect yourself have become your prison, hit that like button. Sometimes our greatest strength can become our greatest weakness when it keeps us from what we truly need. The revelation changed something fundamental between them. Sebastian didn't suddenly transform. He was still controlling, still possessive. But there was a new awareness to his actions, a conscious effort to loosen his grip on the reins that governed their relationship. He began asking rather than commanding, suggesting rather than dictating. Small changes that signaled a man trying to rewrite patterns etched deep by years of trauma and power. For Lila, the shift created space to breathe, to rediscover pieces of herself that had been submerged beneath the role of Mrs. Blackwell. She threw herself into her studies, developing her water filtration project with a passion that Sebastian not only tolerated but actively supported, providing resources and connections without attempting to direct her work. "Why are you helping me with this?" she asked one evening as they reviewed the prototype designs in his study. "It's not exactly aligned with Blackwell Industries' profit margins." Sebastian looked up from the blueprints, his expression thoughtful. "Because it matters to you, and because it's the right thing to do." A small smile touched his lips. "Not everything has to be about profit, Lila." That's a surprising statement from a man who measures everything in terms of acquisition and return. "Perhaps I'm learning to measure differently." His eyes held hers, something vulnerable in their depths. "Perhaps I'm learning that some things can't be measured at all." The admission hung between them, significant in its simplicity. Sebastian Blackwell, the man who quantified everything, was acknowledging that some values existed beyond calculation. It was in these moments, these glimpses of the man beneath the power, that Lila felt herself falling, despite her determination to maintain emotional distance. The walls she had built around her heart were crumbling, brick by brick, as Sebastian revealed more of his true self, not just the wounded boy who had learned that control meant survival, but the man who was trying, however imperfectly, to become more than his past had shaped him to be. 6 months into their marriage, Lila found herself facing a truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with the man who had bought her. Not with Sebastian Blackwell, billionaire CEO, but with Sebastian, the man who left coffee by her bed each morning, who listened with genuine interest to her ideas, who still watched her with possessive intensity but now tempered it with something that looked remarkably like respect. The realization terrified her. To love a man who had essentially purchased her felt like the ultimate surrender, the final victory of his control over her life. Yet the feelings persisted, growing stronger with each day, each conversation, each moment of genuine connection. The breaking point came on a rainy evening as they sat in the library, Lila working on her thesis while Sebastian reviewed quarterly reports. The comfortable silence between them was broken only by the patter of rain against the windows and the occasional turning of pages. "I've been thinking," Sebastian said suddenly, setting aside his work. "The 2-year term of our contract marriage is approaching its halfway point." Lila's heart stuttered in her chest. Was he planning to end their arrangement early? Had he tired of her already, despite the changes in their relationship? "And?" she prompted, fighting to keep her voice steady. "And I think it's time we discussed renegotiation." He rose from his chair, moving to stand before her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The current terms are inadequate." "Inadequate how?" Lila set aside her laptop, bracing herself for whatever was coming. Sebastian knelt before her chair, bringing them to eye level, a position of equality that would have been unthinkable months ago. "They're based on a transaction, a business arrangement. And what's between us has become something else entirely, hasn't it?" The question hung in the air, vulnerable in a way Sebastian Blackwell rarely allowed himself to be. Lila studied his face, searching for the calculation, the strategy that had defined their relationship from the beginning. Instead, she found only raw honesty in his eyes. "What are you saying, Sebastian?" "I'm saying I want to tear up the contract." His voice was low, intense. "I want to start over, not as buyer and acquisition, but as two people choosing each other freely." Is that even possible? Lila whispered, the question encompassing all the complexity of their situation. After how we began? I don't know, he admitted, the uncertainty so unlike his usual confidence. But I want to try, because somewhere between controlling you and learning from you, I've fallen in love with you, Lila. Not as a possession but as a partner. As the woman who showed me that true strength isn't in domination, but in vulnerability. The words she had never expected to hear from Sebastian Blackwell hung in the air between them, transforming everything. Lila reached out, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, feeling the tension there. Love can't be commanded or controlled, she said softly. It has to be freely given. I know. His hand covered hers, holding it against his face. That's why I'm asking, not demanding. I'm asking you to stay not because of a contract, not because of your family's debts, but because you choose to. Because perhaps, against all odds and reason, you might feel something for me too. In that moment, with Sebastian kneeling before her, his usual armor of power and control set aside, Lila saw the truth that had been gradually revealing itself over their months together. Beneath the ruthless businessman was a man capable of change, of growth, of love. A man who had used control to survive but was learning, however imperfectly, to live without it. I do feel something, she admitted, the words both a surrender and a victory. Something I never expected to feel for the man who bought me. Then let me earn it properly, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Let me court you as I should have from the beginning. Let me prove that what I feel for you is real, not just another acquisition. If you believe that true love requires both people to be free to choose each other, hit that like button. And if you found yourself caring for someone you never expected to love, share this video with others who might need to hear that sometimes the heart finds its way even in the most unlikely circumstances. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. Sebastian still struggled with his need for control, still had moments where possessiveness overshadowed partnership. But the difference was in his awareness, in his willingness to recognize these patterns and work to change them. For her part, Lila had to overcome years of independence and self-reliance, learning to trust not just Sebastian but her own feelings for him. The woman who had signed a contract selling herself to save her family had to believe she was now choosing freely, that her heart wasn't simply adapting to captivity but finding genuine connection. 3 months later, on a clear autumn evening, Sebastian led her to the garden where a small table had been set with candles and flowers, a private dinner under the stars. What's the occasion? Lila asked as he held her chair. Sebastian smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern features. 1 year ago today, you signed a contract that brought you into my life. Today, I want to offer you a different kind of agreement. He reached into his pocket and withdrew not a ring, but a document. Sliding it across the table, he watched as Lila unfolded it with curious fingers. It was their marriage contract, every clause and condition that had bound her to him. Across it, in bold red ink, was written a single word, void. I don't understand, she said, looking up at him in confusion. It means you're free, Lila. Sebastian's voice was steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. The contract is void. Your family's debts are forgiven, no strings attached. Your brother's medical care is guaranteed regardless of your decision. You can walk away right now, and it will change nothing for them. Lila stared at the document, her fingers tracing the bold red letters. Why now? Because I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you're bound by a piece of paper. Sebastian reached across the table, his hand covering hers but not grasping, simply offering connection. I want to know that when you say you love me, it's real. That when you share my bed, it's desire, not obligation. That when you stand beside me, it's partnership, not ownership. Tears welled in Lila's eyes as the full weight of his gesture settled over her. After a lifetime of control, Sebastian was offering the one thing that truly mattered, choice. What if I choose to leave? She asked, needing to test the boundaries of this newfound freedom. Pain flashed across his features, but he didn't withdraw his hand. Then I will let you go, he said simply. It would break me, but I would let you go. Because I've learned that love isn't about possession. It's about wanting someone's happiness even above your own. In that moment, looking at the man who had purchased her like property but was now setting her free, Lila realized the true transformation that had occurred. Not just in Sebastian, who had learned that control wasn't the same as connection, but in herself. The woman who had signed away her freedom to save her family had found strength she never knew she possessed. I choose to stay, she said softly, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. Not because of a contract or obligation, but because somewhere between resenting you and understanding you, I fell in love with you, Sebastian. The real you, not the billionaire CEO, but the man who leaves coffee by my bed and listens to my ideas and is trying so hard to be more than his past made him. The relief that washed over his face was almost painful to witness. The vulnerability of a man who had spent a lifetime expecting betrayal, now facing the possibility of genuine love. I don't deserve you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Probably not, she agreed with a small smile. But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing, every day, to see the best in each other even while acknowledging the worst. As the candles flickered between them, casting golden light across the void contract that had once defined their relationship, Lila understood the lesson their unlikely journey had taught her. True freedom wasn't the absence of connection, but the presence of choice within it. And true love wasn't about control or surrender, but about two people choosing each other, flaws and all, day after day. 6 months later, as Lila stood in a conference room presenting her completed water filtration system to potential investors, she felt a familiar presence at the back of the room. Sebastian stood quietly watching, pride evident in his eyes as she confidently answered technical questions and outlined implementation plans. You did it, he murmured later as they walked together toward the car, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. No longer a possessive grip but a supportive touch. They were impressed. 3 investment offers already. Lila smiled, leaning slightly into his side. We did it. Your resources, my design. Partnership. Partnership, he agreed, the word carrying weight beyond this single project. Who would have thought that the great Sebastian Blackwell would learn to share control? She turned to face him, studying the face that had once terrified her but now represented home. The sharp angles remained, but the coldness had been replaced by warmth when he looked at her, the calculations softened by genuine emotion. You're still learning, she reminded him with a smile. Just yesterday you tried to override my decision about the manufacturing process. Old habits, he admitted, not defensive but self-aware. But I listened in the end, didn't I? You did. She reached up, her palm against his cheek in a gesture that had become familiar between them. That's the difference. You listen now. You see me as a partner, not a possession. I see you as everything, Sebastian said simply, his arms tightening around her. My conscience, my heart, my home. As the evening sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Lila thought about the rain-soaked night when she had signed a contract selling herself to save her family. How could she have known then that her cage would become a door? That the man who bought her would be the one to set her truly free? What are you thinking? Sebastian asked, noticing her distant expression. That sometimes the things we fear most become the things we need most, she answered honestly. I was so afraid of losing myself to you, but instead, I found parts of myself I never knew existed. And I found the one thing all my money and power couldn't buy, he said, his voice low and intimate. Someone who sees me, all of me, and stays anyway. As their lips met in a kiss that held nothing of possession and everything of partnership, Lila understood the truth that would define their future. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with freedom, but with the journey toward it. And sometimes the people who challenge us most are the ones who help us become who we were always meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and join me for more tales of unexpected love and transformation. Remember that true connection isn't about control or surrender. It's about choosing each other, freely and fully, every single day. I'm Mr. Harrison, and I'll see you in the next timeless love tale.